Welcome to Dispatch Live. I'm Sarah Isger. That's Jonah Goldberg, Steve Hayes, and Mike Warren. And we've got some special guests coming up as well. So Jonah, it's a Sunday. We're all minding our business once again on a weekend. This one was perhaps a little less of a surprise, except the way that it happened. You know, a Sunday afternoon, Joe Biden putting out a letter to the American people saying he's bowing out of the nomination race. I think we all assumed that he would give an address from the Oval Office, that he would sort of go out on his own terms. This felt very much like, frankly, someone acting under duress, potentially Nancy Pelosi's duress. Curious, Jonah, how inevitable was this? Who's going to end up sort of in history looking like the good guy, the bad guy, all that stuff?
Well, first of all, you're right. We actually have no evidence that Joe Biden isn't tied to a chair in a basement somewhere in Rehoboth with duct tape around his mouth as other people are writing his withdrawal letter, right? It's a very weird thing. And it's also just as a matter of, I mean, it's a kind of a footnote, but kind of not. The fact that he gave this gift to Elon Musk, right? He made his announcement on Twitter, right? He didn't post it on the White House website. People would have found it pretty quickly, right? He like it does. I mean, you can talk about it on Advisory Opinions. It does lend more credence to the idea that Twitter is, in fact, the national community bulletin board, right? When even the president does this kind of thing on it. Anyway, I suspect, you know, the Politico TikTok on this was that basically he withdrew the way Hemingway describes bankruptcy, very slowly and then suddenly all at once. I feel like we're going to hear a lot more about what actually happened, and it'll be very interesting to see when he actually does give a statement how bitter he sounds. I suspect he is still bitter, but you know the way.
Also, at the point he gives a statement, Jonah, I don't know who's going to tune into that. Like, I mean, I know we will probably.
Yeah, we're not going to do an emergency pod on it.
Right.
Yeah.
He has become.
That's what you think.
Don't
irrelevant.
be sure. Don't be sure.
Shut up, Steve. He's basically now more than a lame duck president, or less than a lame duck president, as it were. I mean, Steve, this is the worst way I can imagine as a political operative for your principal to go out. It seems like he had this opportunity to sort of go out on his own terms, and then he tested positive for COVID. The momentum was still moving against him so quickly, but he couldn't get back to the White House. He couldn't give the address that he wanted to give. And obviously time was of the essence. And as he's getting these phone calls, and I'm being told ducking some of these phone calls, that he simply, you know, was told, you're out of time. I know you'd like to do this on your own back in the White House on Thursday, but we don't have till Thursday. Do it now.
Yeah, I mean,
or see what happens next.
Yeah, I don't think the timing of the announcement matters a ton, right? Like he was going to have to do this. He had lost so much steam. You had big dollar Democratic donors freezing their contributions. You had a steady stream of Democratic elected officials in Washington and beyond Washington saying they weren't going to support him anymore. This was sort of building to its natural conclusion, and the natural conclusion, I think, happened today. I mean, I understand there have been lots of statements today from Democratic elected officials, including some statements from Republican elected officials that have praised Joe Biden and said he's been a good president. He's a patriot for doing this. He put his country first, unlike Donald Trump. And I guess I'm a little cynical about that. Like, he didn't really have a choice here. He hung on, clinging to by his fingernails till the last possible second to do this. And only when it was clear, I believe, and we will learn a lot more about this, I think, in the next day or two, that Nancy Pelosi and others were ready to turn up the heat publicly and really make it untenable for him to continue the position he had. Only then did he say, I'm going to do the right thing. You don't get credit for doing the right thing if you're forced to do the right thing.
Mike, how much of this was the politics that he looked like he couldn't win in November versus the debate performance, which was really something else. It was about his mental acuity and ability to campaign, to do the job, to serve out 4 more years. I consider those separate questions because in some ways, if parties now get to sort of rethink in July how their nominee is doing, it's a very different lesson learned from this episode than if the person you nominated is no longer mentally fit. You get to revisit the question. And to Steve's point, I think it goes to sort of the heroism aspect of this, because if Joe Biden were leading Donald Trump by 6 points, surely no Democrats would have asked him to withdraw from the race, no matter how bad that debate performance had been.
Yeah, but I want to go back quickly to what Jonah suggested. Until we see that picture of Joe Biden holding up the Rehoboth Cape Gazette from July 21st, I won't really believe it. Look, you're right, Sarah. There are 2 separate questions here, but I think they are obviously interrelated, right? This is the debate is what revealed, I think, if people don't, some of my friends on the right don't believe this, but I think there were a lot of people who had not seen, I'm talking about high levels of sort of media, the Democratic Party, certainly donors, who had not seen Joe Biden recently. And it shocked them. And when we came to find out, remember the George Clooney op-ed, which I think actually had a lot to do with what happened today. When that op-ed came out, I was fascinated by the fact that he revealed personal firsthand knowledge of how Joe Biden was, and that it comported with what all of the rest of America saw on TV on the debate night. And so I think that shock really, it was revealing information to not just donors, not just Democratic leaders, but to voters that they were unaware of beforehand. And there was a bit of a collective kind of agreement that even Democrats were sold a bill of goods with Joe Biden, and that they needed to make a do-over. And the other fact is that this is fully within the Democratic Party's rules. You can nominate whoever you want. It's just that our system now, both parties use this, kind of primary and caucus nominating process. But what we're seeing now is sort of the party looking at an emergency and trying to act in its own best interest before they can no longer act. I don't think this is like giving us a path forward for how parties will act in the future in the specific way. Maybe in a more general way, parties will follow what Jonah is often asking them to do, which is to sort of bring back the smoke-filled rooms, with and make decisions that are in the party's interest, and not simply letting it all go to what primary voters want.
I will say, just on the history thing really quick, you could no longer ever say debates don't matter.
I know, which is so annoying.
Whatever theory you think about the role of the debate in this, whether it revealed mental incompetence or inability to win or some really bad strategery or was a smart or a dumb thing,
decision.
It doesn't matter. It mattered.
It mattered.
It mattered.
Can I do something that I never do?
Dear God.
And that's give Jonah
Write a
credit.
piece?
Give Jonah credit. I was working on a piece there. Tough guy. Jonah had, I mean, not that this was like some level of brilliance that, the average toddler couldn't figure it out, but Jonah put it on paper and wrote a really compelling column a couple days before the debate and said, hey, generally I'm somebody who thinks that this stuff doesn't matter, that debates don't matter that much, that they don't change races, but this debate is going to be different. And it's going to be different for the following reasons. And he sort of walked people through exactly why the debate was going to be different, why it would matter, and in a sense, laid out what we saw from Joe Biden. So I do think you're right. It certainly mattered. I mean, it was everything in this race. And Joe Biden apparently himself, according to reporting I've read in a number of different places, was the one who really wanted to push this. They thought that they needed to change the trajectory of the race. They needed to change the narrative, and that Joe Biden even in sort of, I think, his addled state, pushed to do the debate. And nobody on his staff who'd been watching him in private, seeing undoubtedly many more examples of the things that we'd all been seeing in public, greenlighted the thing and said, yeah, this is a good idea.
Jonah, what does this mean for our sort of shared thesis about the weakness of political parties? Because on the one hand, 2016, the Republican Party stopped existing as a political party as such. And I think both you and I point to that as, see, like, we call them political parties, but they're really not in the way that we used to refer to political parties as political machines that actually had control over their own destiny. And the Access Hollywood tape was an example of that. But even just Donald Trump winning the primary was an example of that. Okay, here's the counterexample. The Democratic Party just pushed Joe Biden out. He did not want to leave. He wants to be the nominee of this party, and he won the primary, and they gnaw-dogged him real hard. So how is this fitting into your parties are so weak now thesis?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's fair. I mean, the phrase "the party decides," which is like this shorthand in political science for this argument that ultimately the parties get to decide, right? The nominee. The phrase isn't "Pelosi decides," and I do think.
I mean, is that the answer? That actually, when Nancy Pelosi is no longer in the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party will look the same as the Republican
No,
Party?
I don't think that's right.
Okay.
I think that the Democratic Party, because it had the reason why we went to primaries was because of the Democratic Party's problems with dealing with populism. And then the primaries created such problems for the Democratic Party that they created the superdelegate thing, right? And then that kind of got embarrassing in 2008. So they're not superdelegates or whatever. But my point is that the Democratic Party actually has muscle memory as institutional, knowledge about dealing with these sort of mechanical problems, because it has been a coalitional party for ever. I mean, 100 years.
So spell it out. Why couldn't the Republican Party do it in 2016? Why couldn't it protect itself from takeover by Donald Trump and populism? And then why couldn't it do anything politically? I'll set aside the legal stuff, which we're going to get to in a little bit here, after the Access Hollywood tape.
Yeah. So my argument would be because it had no institutional memory of having to deal with populism. Populism, to the extent that it flirted with populism since Nixon, was always a benefit for it, and it knew how to keep it as a junior partner in its coalition. And so it never had, there were none of the demagogues of the 1930s were Republicans, really. I mean, except for McCarthy, and he wasn't running for president, and he drank himself to death pretty quickly. And so the Republican Party had really no sort of institutional memory for how to deal with this, and it didn't realize what it had done when it married itself to Fox News and right-wing media, to the point that it hadn't realized how vulnerable it made itself to take over. But let's be honest. I mean, the Democratic Party was almost taken over by Bernie Sanders in 2016 as well. And I would argue that this last-ditch effort, and we can all agree it was last ditch, shouldn't have happened, right? This is the kind of thing that, as we have editorialized and others have said, they should not have allowed Joe Biden to run again. I mean, I'm going to have A.B. Stoddard, our friend, back on the Remnant to do a victory lap, because, I've been inundated with email from listeners saying you got to have her on so she can, win whatever prize, because she was saying almost 2 years ago on my podcast, it is just fundamentally impossible to run with a guy this old. You cannot do it. He is fading. He is sunsetting. You cannot have him. And I think she thought they would come to that decision a little more soberly and responsibly a little earlier. But that's sort of where we are. So kudos to the Democratic Party for stopping the train wreck, early. But some of that has to do with the fact that they just knew he was going to lose. They would not have stopped any of this if they thought he was going to win.
Okay, Steve, betting man that you are, does Biden serve out his term? January 20th. Noon.
I think he probably does. If for no other reason than Democrats are sort of tired of the drama. I mean, I think it's more likely than not that Kamala Harris is going to be the Democratic nominee. The conversation has moved very quickly in her direction over the past 7 hours. I think in part because of some very smart strategic decisions that she and her team have made in this short time since Biden said he was not going to run. Look, I think there are legitimate questions about whether Joe Biden should continue to serve out his term. I think what we saw, again, not just in the debate, but before the debate and after the debate, importantly, suggests that he's probably not the best person to occupy that seat between now and January when he goes. There was a tweet yesterday from one of Biden, from his campaign spokesman, Andrew Bates. And I don't want to spend a lot of time beating up people who were sort of making the best case for Joe Biden while Joe Biden was in the race. It wasn't a case that I was going to make. And I think that they were sort of actively deceiving the American voters. But for many of the people working for the campaign, this was their job. They had to sort of do it to the end. I get that. But he said something to the effect of, Joe Biden is eager to prove when he gets back from COVID, he's eager to prove to people that he's up for the job and that he can do it. And I just thought, in the 3 weeks since the debate, Joe Biden has called Kamala Harris Donald Trump. He called Volodymyr Zelensky Vladimir Putin. He had all sorts of verbal cul-de-sacs. He has repeatedly
He referred to his
mixed
Secretary
things
of
up.
Defense as that black guy.
That black man. I mean, like, he had his
Lots of
opportunity.
Republicans refer to him that way too.
He had his opportunity to show people that he could do it. And the reason, I think, among many others, a primary reason that he's not the candidate anymore is because he failed. He couldn't do it because he couldn't do it. So I do think there are reasonable questions about his ability to continue to serve. And I think we'd be better off without Joe Biden as president from today until January. I think they will make the argument that, look, he's president. He decided he couldn't do a 4-year slog. The actuarial tables were against him, but he's certainly fine to be president between now and January. I think Republicans will definitely use that in the campaign against Kamala Harris, if that's who it is, in particular, if that's who it is. But against any Democrat, they will say, look, you were in on it. Why do you want him to be president now? He's not running because he can't do the job. What makes you think he could do the job now, but he can't do the job in February?
So, Mike, let's move to what happens next. We had heard for at least the last few days, as this became a feeling of inevitability, that Vice President Harris's team did not want a coronation. They wanted at least it to feel like the party had a choice and that they picked her. But in the few hours since Joe Biden announced this, it has become a coronation. I'll be shocked if there's really anyone left by midnight tonight that hasn't, a major, person within the party that hasn't endorsed her. In part, this is like very human nature. Once a few people started endorsing her, then it felt like a lot of people were, you don't want to be the last one to endorse the person who's definitely going to be the nominee. So the second it starts feeling like the ball's rolling downhill, everyone jumps on the snowball gets bigger, then more people have to jump on the snowball. But there was also a problem with the whole theory of the mini primary, which was if this whole thing is to make it look like Harris isn't being coronated, then whoever runs in the mini primary is just fodder, cannon fodder, really. So you're there to lose to Harris in a fake mini primary, which is going to make you look like you politically lost to Harris, who nobody thinks is a particularly good politician. So if you're Newsom, Whitmer, any of these major people, even people she's considering as vice president, by the way, the last thing you want to do is compete in a mini primary that's stacked already. So
Dean Phillips has some time on his hands.
None of the real people were ever going to jump in. And instead, the only name that we've heard so far is literally someone who's not in the Democratic Party, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who I guess had a call with Donna Brazile earlier tonight. Donna Brazile on the Rules Committee of the Democratic National Committee and former chair of the DNC, to which I guess Donna said, you have to be a Democrat to do this. Look, just tactically speaking, remember, this will still go to a first ballot with the delegates who had been pledged to Joe Biden, who have now obviously been released. These are people selected by Biden from congressional districts. They are not randos pulled off the street that happen to be registered Democrats. They hate Joe Manchin, and there's roughly 4,000 of them. If they can't reach a majority on the first ballot, then you add in the 700 formerly referred to as superdelegates. I think this is going to be very easy on the first ballot. I think it always was. And it's going to be Harris. Mike, is there any world in which, she comes out tomorrow, starts talking about coconuts and being unburdened by the coconuts, that there actually is a real primary here?
I don't think so. And I'm basing this off of a conversation I had with a Democratic elections attorney, election lawyer, who kind of walked me through the process. And there are actually a lot of structural problems with somebody other than Harris getting the nomination. All the reasons you just described, the sort of circling of the wagons, the coalescing of party leaders, is very important. But this person pointed out to me that, in just a few days, the people who actually will matter are those delegates to the Democratic National Convention. And you're right, these are Biden loyalists. Not every single one is a Biden loyalist. It is not every single one is vetted and goes through a whole process. But as I was told,
I was told they were definitely this time vetted hard.
Well, I think any non-Biden any anti-Biden folks were
remember
called.
In 2016, they had this problem of it
Yes.
turned out there were a bunch of Bernie bros who became delegates because they hadn't been vetting their delegates. So they were like, not making that mistake again. These delegates are locked the F down.
There's that institutional memory of these kind of issues. But beyond that, but the delegates have a lot of power here. Like, it's in their hands for what to do. So first, you've got Biden endorsing Kamala Harris immediately. Okay, so what do we expect Biden loyalists to do? They're not just automatons. They're not just going to do exactly what Biden says. But if he's endorsing Kamala Harris, they're likely to endorse Kamala Harris. The other issue is actually getting enough signatures to be considered in either probably, if it continues, the virtual roll call vote or the actual roll call vote at the convention. So what's necessary now under the current DNC rules is you need 300 delegate signatures on a petition that says that to qualify for getting a vote for the nomination. And they can't be more than 50 signatures from a single state delegation. So Kamala Harris can't just get all 300 signatures from the state of California. She's got to get them all around. But she's making those calls now. I mean, it's happening. It's not a heavy lift for her. It wouldn't necessarily be a heavy lift for somebody else to do that. So right there's a barrier to entry for anybody who wants to challenge Kamala Harris. It just doesn't make sense under the rules as they are currently constituted.
Can I
ask a question?
And a quick.
Steve, your mic has.
Steve, your mic went out.
Sorry, I have to hold it. Sorry. Just a quick point of reporting, and then just a brief expansion on the point I made just a moment ago. The point of reporting. It's interesting. Just a few days ago, talked to senior Democrats, and they were skeptical that Kamala Harris would have the delegates to win if Joe Biden dropped out. So obviously, a lot has changed. The fact that Joe Biden endorsed her, the fact that you've got these Democratic Party chairs in the states behind her, the fact that you've now seen this didn't start right away. I mean, it was a slight delay in this. Elected Democrats sort of rallying behind her, I think, suggests that she's likely to end up the nominee. What I think the Harris team did early, if you were following this sort of minute by minute, as we all were, and making phone calls and on the phone to Democratic strategists, Republican strategists, following it on Twitter and elsewhere, there was a moment where the Joe Biden resigns. He takes 25 minutes before he endorses Kamala Harris. Then everybody's looking to see who else is mentioning Harris in their statements. Some Democrats did, the Clintons did, other prominent Democrats did. President Obama did not. And the question is there going to be a moment where sort of Kamala Harris is not the presumptive nominee? And in that time frame, Biden then endorsed her 25, 30 minutes later. In that time frame, the Harris team started leaking her VP list, her running mate list. And it popped up at a variety of websites, a variety of news outlets at roughly the same time. Oh, Kamala is considering Josh Shapiro. She's thinking about
the governor of Pennsylvania,
Andy Beshear,
the governor of Kentucky.
Right.
Roy
She's thinking
Cooper, the
about
governor
Roy
of.
Cooper, governor of North Carolina. And you start seeing these leaks where
Well, wait,
Kamala
and
Harris
mention the fourth one, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. Those were
Mark
the
Kelly, senator from Arizona. There was one other person on the list who I'm forgetting now. I think it was another
Bashir?
senator.
No, you said Bashir.
yeah, I
It was
said
just the
Bashir.
four that I saw. The three
Okay.
governors and Mark Kelly from
So
Arizona.
a bunch
So
of
three
people
swing
had this in
states,
common.
kind of.
Yes, exactly. A bunch of people had this in common. It was obvious that it came from the Harris team. And what it did almost immediately was fascinating to watch in real time. It turned the conversation from who will be the Democratic nominee to who will Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, choose as her running mate. And you could watch this in real time. I was watching CNN. This is how the conversation went. And immediately the conversation turned. And there was this assumption then that it would be Kamala Harris, that she was inevitable, which is one of the reasons for the leak, and that the question was who she would pick to run with. Who knows? Maybe it won't work. There's some chance that it's not her, I suppose, still. But I think that moment, we'll look back on today and that moment and that decision to do that, which was not without risk, it has to be said.
I was going to say that was a
Hugely
high risk move that it could look pathetic.
Totally agree. And I texted one Republican about this who's sort of smart about all of this. And the person just responded after watching sort of the Biden team and Joe Biden struggle through the last several months, say, I'm just relieved that Kamala Harris has a team and that they make strategic decisions. So,
well, this is one of the big political liabilities that was true in 2020. And I have, it was certainly true in the beginning of the presidency. And I have no reason to believe it's not true now, which is she does not have the type of lifetime political team around her that successful politicians do. She cycles in and out of staff very, very quickly, particularly comm staff. And I actually think it's part of the reason that she does struggle sometimes is because she doesn't really have both the people that she trusts and the people that know her well enough to be able to tell her no or go this way or nudge her the way that the best teams do. I mean, you go back to the Clinton, Begala, Carville, Stephanopoulos triumvirate. You've got it with George W. Bush and Karl Rove. You've got it with Obama and Axelrod. Obviously, Biden, we now have gotten to know his inner circle a little too well. For Harris, it's been her sister. And I think we saw with the Biden team that family members don't always make the best political operatives. Jonah.
Can I ask you a question or all of you a question real quick? Let's assume that we don't hear in the next 24 hours about an elderly man covered in pieces of cut rope and duct tape saying, I was kidnapped and I just got away. I'm running for president. I have not withdrawn. Right. And, and the good people at Grotto's Pizza in Rehoboth call the police and lots of people arrested. Let's assume this is real. In 3 weeks, does Joe Biden campaign for Kamala in places like Pennsylvania? Do they use him as a surrogate? Or does he just stay the hell out of it?
Who were you talking about? Joe who?
Yeah. I don't think we hear much from Joe Biden again.
maybe in Scranton.
We'll see.